Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for coming and joining this seminar. My name is Mohammad Zakir Hossain. I work with AIT Extension as a Senior Program Specialist and Director of Programs. So it's a great pleasure for all of us on behalf of AIT Extension and AIT to welcome you all who are joining here physically, and also we understand we have many friends, many participants joining online these sessions. So for all of your information, this is a series of knowledge sharing sessions we call. This is the AIT Extension Knowledge Sharing Session. And this is the second in this year. We have had a first one very recently from the Executive Director of AIT Extension. And this is the second, and then we will have many talks, many seminars will come in near future and over the years. So with that, let me just talk a little bit how we are going to proceed with this seminar. Of course, I'm beginning the talk, and my job is as a moderator to do the moderation of these sessions. This lecture or this session will go for an hour, roughly, a little bit less or a little bit more. We will have a welcome message from our Executive Director. Unfortunately, our Executive Director is not physically present in this room or in AIT right now. He is actually in an official mission in Sri Lanka at the moment. So he is actually joining us online, and I can see he's there already to keep this little welcome message after me. And followed by his message or his welcome remarks, I will introduce you about this session and also very specifically about the speaker. After that, we will have the session run by our speaker, and I understand he will roughly might take 30-40 minutes for his presentation. And those of you who are having questions, queries, please note it down. We will have a Q&A session at the end of his talk. And then, of course, after that, we will conclude today's session. So it's let's hope that everything is done within an hour. We are very pleased that among the audiences physically present here, we have Professor Kim from Environmental Engineering and Management Department of AIT. And then, of course, we have many colleagues, and I understand we have many students are here. So once again, welcome you all. I think to start with the next part, I will now welcome our Executive Director, Mr. Voravet Chonlasin, to say a few words and welcome the audiences and also the speaker. Over to you, Mr. Voravet.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Zakir Hossain. And good afternoon to everyone. Good afternoon, Dr. Carl. It is my great pleasure to welcome you all to this event, the second event of AIT Extensions. And this time, we are doing this event in close collaboration with the School of Environment, Resources and Development. And we are very honored that to have our guest presents in person today. And also, I can see that many learners, listeners now also joining online. As I can recall, during my old days, I mean, when I was young, we read one of the books called The Limited to Growth. And after 4 decades, now it is coming to have us to rethink about what is our future. And also, I mean, these topics today is how to unlock, the mindset of, limit to growth. Maybe we can see what is the potentials of the unlimited growth. And we are very happy that Dr. Carl is with us today. AIT Extension is regularly running this event. We invite the thought leaders, the innovators, and also the futurists to talk to our audience. bringing some of the new subjects areas and some new knowledge that will be important for our futures, before, during, and after COVID, and also the changing landscape of our global environment is coming, so that we need to explore what are the areas that we can be more innovative, being in the ecosystem, being in the markets, and also being relevant to the new world. So thank you for joining. Thank you, Dr. Carl. And I would like to wish you enjoy this session. Thank you, Dr. Saki. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Boravet Chonlasin. That was a wonderful welcome remarks, experience sharing also from his personal background. So with that, I think this is the time to welcome you all to this seminar, which is titled with Unlocking the Potential of Unlimited Growth, Achieving Abundance for All. I believe those of you who have seen the brochure or the flyer of this, you have read through it. It's a very interesting topic for me also, specifically, I understand we have people here with many different backgrounds, and when we are talking about growth or economic growth, it is for all different sectors, correct? I personally work heavily in the field of agriculture and food. And in that area, growth is obvious, growth is abundant, growth is enormous, and then growth is always comes with also a lot of issues. Probably those of you who are basically concerned about the the pitfalls or the environmental issues and the social issues and many other issues coming alongside the growth. We are very much concerned about unlimited growth. We always think about the growth should be controlled, growth should be minimized, growth should be within the limit. You have this terminology that we have been using for probably a couple of decades already. We call it carrying capacity. Everything has a carrying capacity. But if you look at the title of this seminar, it's quite interesting. We are talking about unlimited growth, and we are talking about it is possible within this era and within our lifetime. And if you do not go for the unlimited growth, it's probably your failure to actually fulfill the requirements, to fulfill the things. But there are also other side of it. And in that aspect, I was saying that this seminar is quite interesting. And we are really looking forward. Personally, I'm really excited to hear about this. Just to connect you, also it has been mentioned in the flyer and also in the communication that this seminar is connected with a third seminar, which was in 1999. Okay, CERD means, those of you who do not know or you are not familiar much about AIT, CERD is the School of Environment, Resource and Development, which is one of the 3 major schools in AIT. So the reason why this seminar is connected, because Professor Carl was actually connected with the school at that time. He was the seconded faculty from Danish government or from Denmark, and he was working with CERD. And in 1999, there was a seminar that happened. It's called Growth Unlimited, if I remember it well. And many of the people who have actually worked, including Professor Kim, who is also here, that time together with Professor Carl, they have had these proceedings. I haven't been able to read entirely the proceedings, but if you had, you probably have seen there what are the issues that people are talking in that time. It's more than 20 years or 22 years before we have been. So we are really excited to hear the connection between that seminar and today's talk, and the issues that we have just spoken, or I have just spoken, how and in what way our speaker is trying to actually elaborate or explain it from his angle or from his perspective. So with that, let me also introduce our speaker. So our speaker today is Professor Carl Ivar Dahl Madsen, originally from Denmark. He's a Danish citizen, And this morning we were just chatting my experience living in Denmark for little period that I spent in 2004. And I just came to know that I spent 6 months in the area where actually he was born and he has grown up. So there are some link, and we were sharing the experiences that we had. Of course, it's a different world. Probably those of you have not been to Europe or the northern part of Europe. That's completely different than this part of the world. Their thinking, their thoughts, their ideas is completely different compared to the people here. But of course, we are not going into that because we like to hear much about that from the professor. So just to recall and remind you that Professor Carl was with AIT from 1997 to 1999 as a Danish government seconded faculty and attached with environmental engineering and management field of studies under the School of Environment, Resource and Development. And of course, that's his original background. The connection with AIT, but his background, to say a few words about his background, he is a chemical engineer by education. And then, of course, he has worked in industry and in academia for quite some time. He has been the former president. He was the former president of Copenhagen Institute of Future Studies, which is very fascinating, probably center or institute. We'd like to hear a little more from you. And also the former president of Danish aquaculture, which is very interesting because this is the area that I also work. And I really like to hear more from you about your connection with Danish aquaculture. I was reading his CV and I found that he has done quite a lot of work in the field of aquaculture or aquatic production. He has developed the method and technology of doing some farming of some aquatic animals, and that eels, basically, eel fish, probably you probably know. And actually that technology is being used by many countries, many companies at the moment. So that's about his background. At the moment, he's a consulting engineer. He has been very prominent, and also he has been working quite a lot in the field of agriculture and food. And of course, we also probably will learn a lot in that aspect. So with that, I think this is the time to start the talk. I will request Dr. Carl, Professor Carl, to speak a little bit more about himself and his previous time at AIT before starting his presentation. And then, as I was just mentioning, that please note down your question and queries. Those of you who are sitting here physically, and of course our friends or participants joining online, please keep noting your question, or you can actually, the online participants can throw the question and we try to get this question at the end to Professor Carl to answer. So thank you very much to all of you. Once again, thank you very much for all of your time and joining this session. Over to you, Professor Carl.
Thank you much. Thank you very much for this nice welcome from the extension program and from AIT. I'm very happy to be back here. It was one of the best times in my life when I went here originally. I learned a lot, because if you come from a small, rich country like Denmark, you don't really appreciate the real problems of the world. And that trip gave me the opportunity to know much more than I did at that time. Several times a year to young people in Denmark, and they are quite excited about it because it's something different from what you hear from all the newspapers and so on. As Dr. Hussain said, I have a diverse background. I'm doing many things. I'm still active in the fish farming business. I'm part of the board of directors of a major Danish fish farming company. And I also do some digital newspapers together with my daughter. We have a family company. And eventually I hope to go to Thailand to do that too. And it's true that I have been president of the Danish Institute for Future Research. And that means that I'm used to thinking long term and thinking out of the box, because that's what future studies do. So let me remember the very, very nice times at the Institute in Thailand. What you see here is my students and also the former dean of CERT is ringed in. I had 7 very smart students from different countries in the area, and I still have contact with many of them. And you also see a picture in the upper left corner of one of the most famous professors in environmental engineering, Professor Harmos. And I have a little story about him because he was a pioneer in using mathematics for studying environmental engineering. Formerly, it was only about trial and error, but he got it into the modern age. But as you all know, environmental engineering was in the old days called sanitary engineering. And this guy, who was a very smart guy and had a good life, he came to a hospital, he got an antibiotic-resistant bacteria, and he died within 24 hours. So that can happen to anyone. It's a tragedy, but it happens. Then the final thing I did together with some good colleagues at AIT was to make a research seminar called The Growth Unlimited. And Professor Kim Wan is here. She was writing an article with me in the proceedings. And I also want to mention a very important Professor Gajendra Singh. He was fantastic in organizing this, and he told me a very interesting story, which is a good starter for this lecture. He was visiting California at a time where a guy called Paul Ehrlich, I don't know if you know this guy, but he's such a perpetual doomsday. He always says that we will starve to death all the time and overpopulation is bad and so on. And he also told the audience at that time that India could not feed itself and it would be starving to death, all of the Indians. And then the young Gajendra Singh, he went up to the professor and said, "It's not true. I'm coming from India. I'm an agriculture engineer. We are actually now starting to export food." And this guy didn't care. He was just completely indifferent to real facts. I don't know why, but I think I can tell you one thing for sure. To make doomsday prophecies sells very well. To say that the world is going better doesn't sell so good. But anyway, at that time, we had 2 primary outputs from the seminar. The first one is that the world will not end soon. And it's absolutely correct. I mean, it's gone 23 years and the world has not ended. So that was a good prophecy. And the second thing we said was that the world will become better on all counts. And I will show you a bit about that now. First, I would also have to say that for some strange reasons, everybody are talking climate change. It has grabbed the world's attention and the world's funding. I think that's a bad thing. I'm not saying climate change is not an issue, but it's certainly not a big issue compared to many other issues. And it grabs too much attention. I would, to my mind, it don't even come into the top 5 and maybe even top 10 of the world's issues. But anyway, everybody are talking about it. So let's see what happened to the climate in 100 years. Since 2020, the world has warmed with 1 degree Celsius, and the sea level has risen with 30 centimeters. Okay, that's it. But what had happened to other things? Our population has nearly quadrupled from 1.9 billion to 7.7 billion. The infant mortality has gone down very much. So it's now only 4%. Even from the time I was in Thailand, it has halved all over the world. The life expectancy has gone up from 35 years 100 years ago to 72 years. Think about that. I'm now 76, so I'm increasing the life expectancy. And let me add something here. When I talk about that, it's not only that we live longer, we are also healthier. And when I talk to the young guys in Denmark, I tell them, I can beat any one of you in badminton. And they look at me a little bit. And then I know in Denmark, if you have 25 people like here, 4% of Danish population play badminton. That's 1 out of 25. And the likelihood that this one can beat me is not much, because I'm not an elite player in any way, but I've played a lot, so I can hit the ball. So I will also challenge you down there. Are there anyone who can beat me in badminton? Come forward. No, you can see. So that's one of the things about being grown up and being live long, that you can live healthy and you can have a good life. Then if we look at the wealth of the world, it has gone up 8 times in the 100 years per capita. And that's huge also, and it will possibly continue at least for many, many years. And the percentage below the United Nations poverty line, which is a little bit more than $1 per day, has declined from 70% to 10%. If you go 200 years back, everybody except very rich people were below poverty line. The literacy rate has increased from 32% to 88%. And then abundance of material resources has increased. There are many ways of monitoring that, but I'm fond of the Simon's Abundance Index, which started in 1980, and it is a measure which says how many hours do you need to work to get a good. And that's even more better than inflation regulated, but because how many hours do you have to work to buy a phone or a television? And you can see from 1980 to now, the abundance of all material goods had increased 7 times using that measure. And energy, we look at back to 1990s, 30% of all people in the world had no electricity. Now it's only 10% who doesn't have electricity. And if you look at the yield of agriculture, it has increased in 1960 with wheat yield from 1 to 3.5 tons per hectare. And malnutrition has also decreased a lot from 65% since 1950 and down to 7% now. This is amazing. And of course, it's not because it has become warmer or the sea level has risen or because of climate change in any way. There's a little bit good things about a hotter, wetter world with more CO2. It will actually enhance growth, and it has enhanced plant growth. But it's a minor factor, exactly like the International Climate Panel says. Clearly, it says, for most economic sectors, the impact of climate change will be small relative to other impacts, like socio-economic development and so on. And that's true. You can look at the world, you can find very, very rich people in very, very hot countries. You can also find very poor people. The same thing with cold. You can find very poor people in cold countries and very rich people in cold countries. Weather and climate is not a major factor for human welfare and well-being. That's it. I know somebody don't like to hear it, but it's a fact of life. So can we live in a world with growth without limits? Am I the only one who is saying that? No, I'm not. There are a lot of smart guys out there writing books about it. Give you some examples. A Fossil Future, which says that we should keep on burning coal because the benefits of burning coal many times outweighs the costs of burning coal. And there's a lot of coal out there. Superabundance is about the Simon's Abundance Index, and particularly factfulness. I would recommend to you, it's a Swedish researcher called Hans Rosling, who has done studies of how the world is getting to be a better place. And you should really enjoy him. He also said on Danish television, being interviewed, that you cannot rely on media for anything. Media does not give you a good, relevant picture of the world, because media are only looking at bad things. They don't look at incremental betterment of things. They don't see it. Steven Pinker also have written a book about enlightenment now, and there's a very smart Danish author and businessman called Lars Tvede, who has written a book. It's now translated to Chinese. Actually, it's called Super Trends, which I can recommend. He's a super future studies man. So why should I care? I can see that the world is getting better on all counts if I look at the data. Why should we care that somebody is saying that it's not? It's because the false idea of scarcity is harming to the world. We saw it first time for real was Malthus in the 1700s. A rather smart guy, actually. He said that the world population would grow exponentially, but the food yield or food production would only grow linearly. And then, of course, eventually people would starve. But it happened opposite. Actually, the food production increased exponentially, and the world growth curve in some way stagnated. And then there was, as Dr. Hussain named, the very important book called Limits to Growth in 1972. I was very interested in that at that time as a young engineer. And it also set up some completely false scenarios who now are falsified and coming up with a lot of nonsense. What actually I had my students at AIT run the Limits to Growth world model. It's a quite simple model. Anybody can use it. And I just had to change one important parameter, that is the technological development. As soon as I put in reasonably values for technological development, all the scarcity problems and pollution problems and whatever problems run away. And now we have it again. This is the climate alarmism. It's the same thing, that we should live not so good lives, and we should be ascetic, and we shouldn't do this and we shouldn't do that. It's just as wrong as the other was. So if we look at the population of the Earth, we can see that that's a study of adaptation. There's no such thing as overpopulation or population explosion. We human beings are very smart of increasing the carrying capacity of the Earth. If we look at subsistence farming, it only produces 1/100 of what a good modern farmer can do, and that's how we are increasing the carrying capacity. And we can also adapt to a given carrying capacity. In nature, it works the way that the creatures start dying at a much higher rate, and then you get a stagnating population. But we don't do that. We stop having as many children. And there was actually a Danish sociologist for 100 years ago called Esther Boserup who saw it very clearly. She saw that Africa's problem was underpopulation, because they could just go out and get what they wanted without doing a real effort. And so she said that development of the world is through a series of crises. You reach some threshold for what you can do, and then you invent things, and you get better off, and then the next crisis comes on, and so on. And she could also call it that necessity is the mother of inventions. And one fantastic thing is the demographic transition, that we can actually adapt our fertility to the situation. We can do it in bad ways like China, where they simply prohibited to have more than one children. And that's a crazy and brutal way, and it will harm them for I would say, centuries, that China will be harmed by that, because they now have a very skewed population pyramid. They have problems taking care of the elderly, and they are not as vibrant. Personally, I'm quite sure that India will be the biggest economic power in about 100 years. They have a young, vibrant, innovative population, and they don't have this crazy stop on the population growth. So they will, and they also have a little bit more modern institutions and more democratic and so on. So I certainly think that India will be the biggest. We live longer, as I told you before, and that's a very nice thing. 72 years is a lot. And if we look at Honduras, it's 25 years, so it's quite a miracle. And we know now, if a young girl is born in Denmark today, there's 50% chance that she will live to be 100 years. And now there is a biological upper limit, because very few people have lived more than 120 years or something like that. So with the existing knowledge, it seems to be the limit. However, there is so much research going on to try to make people live forever. And I had a very nice discussion with the former Irish president of AIT when I was there. At that time, we had this discussion, and one of the things I told him was, if you can live, if you don't die from aging reasons, but you just die from accidents, you will be much more risk averse. Young people like you has a risk of 1 divided by 700 to die each year from some accident. And that's not a lot. But if you knew that you could live for 10,000 years, you would probably be very careful not to go mountain climbing, at least. We also get full of food. And I can tell you very, very clearly that if people go hungry, it's not because of lack of production capacity. It's because they are governed by idiots, to be quite frank. They're governed by people who use the money for other purposes than feeding their people. And we hear these endless laments that we will start starving and so on, but in fact, the biggest nutrition problem in the world now is too much food. There are more people who are too fat than too thin. So it's not a production capacity problem. And we can see that we have tripled the food availability over the years. And there are still too many malnourished people, but it's a governance problem. It's not a problem of production capacity. And we can also see that our methods of farming are now so efficient that we're starting to see peak farmland. That even if we need more and more food, we will also increase our yields so much that eventually farmland will go down, and that's a very excellent thing because it conserves room for nature. And as an aquaculturist, I can tell you we could actually produce everything we wanted on the sea where there's ample space. I'm not saying we will do it, but at least we could do it if we wanted to do it. And you all know on the sea is no lack of water, and water is the main substance limiting agricultural productions all over the world. Also, energy-wise, we have a lot of fossil fuels still out there. When I was a young engineer, we had oil for 25 years. Now we have oil for 40 years, even if we use 3 times as much. We have methane hydrates and so on. So there's probably 20 of fossil fuels for at least the next couple of 100 years. And I also have to say very clearly that rich and warm is better than cold and poor. I come from a very cold country. That's why I have taken my family here for 50 days to enjoy the heat of Thailand and to save some energy, something on the energy bills. But you should all think about it in a simple way. The average temperature of the world is 15 degrees Celsius. Nobody can survive in 15 degrees Celsius more than a day without protection. If you have thin clothes and so on, you will die within about 24 hours. Whereas you can survive here, if you have water, you can survive more or less forever. So cold is a terrible thing for human beings who are originally a tropical species. And many, many more people die from cold than from heat. And IPCC is right in many things, but they overestimate the warming. Many of their models are not very good models, and I'm a modeler, so I actually know a lot about that. And if we look at the better models, they give a lower rise in temperature than the bad models. What do we do energy-wise in the future? We already now have a solution. We have the fission, nuclear power plants. But there are other ways. The Japanese are thinking about making a solar belt around the moon, which will beam energy down to the Earth. That's a bit science fiction, but it's not completely out of scope. Solar satellites will eventually come up. I don't think they will be used to beam energy down to Earth, but they will probably be used for making factories in space. So you don't need to use a lot of energy here on Earth. And contrary to taking things from Earth and up into space, which is very, very costly, it doesn't cost much money to let it come down. Fusion is, I'm a bit skeptical to fusion. It's also a 40-year thing. Since I was a kid, it was 40 years in the future. It's about 40 years in the future. And I don't think, it's not because it can't work, because the sun is a solar reactor. So of course it can work, a fusion reactor. But it may be technological too difficult to take a sun and put it into a factory. That may be some challenge which we cannot make. But anyway, something can come up. For 150 years ago, we didn't know about nuclear power. And maybe some of you guys or some other guys will find something completely different. So I'm quite sure that the future of the humanity is abundant, cheap, and clear energy. There is one limit, though, we have to consider. That is the heat. If we use too much energy, we heat the Earth. It's not because of carbon dioxide, it's just the waste heat from any energy production. And we can't do that forever. So we have to eventually stop increasing our energy use on the Earth. But I'm not saying then we could move it to space. We also see that we decouple things from year to year. Remember here that there's something called known reserves. And known reserves have nothing to do with how much material there is. It's only the amount of material which have been found and which it's possible to exploit with a given technology and a given amount of money. But the Earth is so great that there's lots of everything. And you could say that nothing can keep up with infinite exponential growth. That's true, but we don't live in an infinite long time. If we look at the sun, it will burn out in about 1.2 billion years. So we have a limited time. I use the analogy, if you inherit 1 million baht from your grandmother, you can easily see how you can use them within a lifetime. But if you use 1 billion baht, it's a different issue. So that can't be enough. Then water consumption. All water in the world, more or less, is used for food production. It takes 1,000 tons of water to make a ton of grain, and a beefsteak takes 250 grams, cost about 4,000 liters of water. Means that you don't need to skip on your showering, because a shower is only 40 liters, and that's just 25 grams of beef. So don't save water the wrong places. Hygiene is much more important than water savings. What are the solutions for water? Because of course there are trouble, there are skewed distribution, and some places the use of the reservoirs. But there's nothing which is free. Water should cost something. And in China, for instance, they have a very bad water productivity because water is not cost anything. So they have a very low production of value per used amount of water. You should also globalize. when you make a pig or a chicken or anything like that, you actually use a lot of water. We call it virtual water. And so we are exporting pigs to Japan, which corresponds to 25% of all the Japanese water in the households. So the virtual water migration is an important part. You shouldn't cultivate deserts. It doesn't make any sense at all to use a lot of water where there is no water, when there's so many countries like Denmark and many other countries where there's sufficient supply of water. Of course, you should primarily make rain-fed agriculture. But anyway, if it really matters, you can always recycle and desalinate water, and for all other purposes. But for agriculture, it's still much too expensive. And then you can cultivate the sea, as I said before. And then we are also getting more peaceful. Here's one example. It's the murder rate in Europe since 1300 and now to 1900. And it's just going down and down. And even wars are playing a smaller and smaller role for mortality in the world. It's not just a monotone curve which goes up and down, but the long-term rate of this kind of stuff is going down. We are becoming a little bit more civilized. And then somebody, of course, would say, what about environment, climate, nature, and all these issues? And I taught my students for 23 years ago, and I still teach everyone, that you should look at the environmental Kuznets curve. Kuznets was an economist who said that when you are very, very poor, all are more or less equal. But when you start getting rich, then equality rises, and then after a while you start redistributing wealth, and then the equality falls again. And I give my own example. I was the first guy from my small village in the southern part of Funen who actually got a high school exam. And for that reason, I was in front of everybody else earning more money. So I increased inequality. But on the pollution side, it's the same thing. When you start being economically active, you have a higher footprint on nature. But after a while, when you get rich enough, say about 5,000 USD per capita, you start being smart enough and rich enough first to care. Why should you care about some strange air pollution if your children doesn't survive? And you also get rich and is competent to do something about it. So that happens all over the place. In some, we can see it very clearly in air pollution. In climate change, we're still on the up part of this curve. But eventually, even if we do nothing, the problem will solve itself because we don't have an infinite amount of fossil fuels anyway. Pollution has several levels, like the Maslow pyramid in human relations. The most important is, of course, water supply and sanitation and indoor pollution, which kills a lot of people. As soon as you get a little bit of money, you see that you don't drink polluted water, which kills you, and you don't use cow dung for using in your house. And so then you go to outdoor air pollution. And I actually saw the curve the other day, and the global air pollution stopped for about 15 years ago. Not stopped, but topped for 15 years ago. In Thailand, it's been going more or less down since I was there. And it's simply a question of being rich enough. And then finally, of course, you want to care for nature and insects and so on. And we can do it. We can do everything. And then, of course, nature biodiversity is an issue. But few people know that biodiversity is historically high now. And it's not so strange because life is difficult to kill. Think about crocodiles and sharks. They have been around for hundreds of millions of years, and they're still around. There's a small decline, actually not just these last 1,000 years, but just after the start of the Holocene for 10,000 years ago, the hunters and gatherers, they hunted down all the big animals. They were slow and easy to kill, and they just killed them. Many more species than is being killed today. You should also be aware that nature and biodiversity is not important for the wealth of nations. The wealth is originally from agriculture. When we start doing agriculture, we free resources for doing other things, and we can easily do without nature in that respect. But of course, we have to take care of ecosystems for both ethical reasons as also for aesthetic reasons. We enjoy it; it's good for us, and we shouldn't extinguish a species. Then we shouldn't extinguish an ecosystem either. But then, what about climate change? Professor Wan and myself said in 1999 that greenhouse does exist, and that's surely true. We were a little bit more insecure how much it actually would influence the temperature. Now we are sure that it at least partly has influenced the temperature clearly. But another very important thing we said at that time was it's evident that the proposed cure of excessive CO2 emissions reductions may well be far more costly than the disease of global warming. And that's still true, and it's said by the climate economist with the Nobel Prize winner Nordhaus, who says very clearly that up to about 3.5 degrees more temperature, it will be more costly to try to prevent them than the cost of the climate change. And particularly because all countries are doing stupid things. For instance, in Denmark, we are building windmills. And windmills is not a good energy form because the wind doesn't blow all the time. It means you have to have a complete backup. So you actually have to make 2 energy systems. And that's just too expensive. And developing countries should never do that. That would be completely ridiculous. Either they should go directly nuclear, or they should do like we did, use coal. And we also have to accept that global warming is not the only serious issue. I have already talked about some of them. You can see outdoor air pollution, indoor air pollution, so on and so on. I even don't believe this global warming, 200,000 people per year dying of net, because as I told earlier, cold kills about 10 times as many people as heat. So of course there will die fewer from cold when the world gets warmer, a little bit more from heat. So I think it's about zero. Global warming doesn't cost any lives at all. So that's from this point of view. Then there is another very important point of view, that is how much better would the world have been if we had solved the problems. And here you can see, it's Mr. Lombard who made this thing. You can see all the prime problems: trade, conflicts, health, gender inequality, education, air pollution, so on, so on, so on. They all matter a huge amount. When we are solving them, the world GDP will increase a lot. But you can nearly not see global warming here. It will eventually be more important because the rest of the problems we are solving anyway. And if you ask people, it's not science, but if you ask people, they don't seem to care a lot. The future cost is seen on this figure, and if we increase the temperature to 4 degrees Celsius, the economists say that we, instead of being 450% richer in 100 years, we will be 434% richer. That's not so good, but it's not a disaster in any way. Extreme weather is not true, that it is, except heat waves are increasing. The other things you can't see. And we look at a very important factor, it's the deaths from extreme weather is declining rapidly. Now we are down to 20,000 people per year. And the cost of extreme weather is also declining. It's down to 0.2% per year for the globe as a whole. So it's not a big issue. Even if it increases somewhat, it will still be much more important to adapt to the changes than to do this. I was studying with some Bangladeshi engineers when I was at AIT, and they had a very big disaster in about 1990 where a couple of 100,000 people died. And then they did the simple solution. They made good warning system and they made shelters, and now very few people die in Bangladesh when there is a storm. That's what you should do, not stop burning coal or build windmills. It will not help. Hunger, I have already talked about that, it's not an issue. We can grow any amount of food people will buy. The only exception is like in Venezuela, where you got a bad regime for 10 years ago, and the food production declined in half. Think about that. It's nothing to do with climate change, but bad governance. And climate diseases, we have malaria mosquitoes in Denmark, and for 200 years ago, 1,000 people died in one of the Danish isles from malaria. So disease prevention is about human ways of controlling the problems, not about temperature. And okay, that the sea is increasing. If all ice melts, it will increase 70 meters, but it will take tens of thousands of years, so we can cope with that. Now the increase is about 3.4 millimeters per year, measured by satellites. That makes it a very small, a very, very small increase in rate. So probably half a meter in 100 years. And the Mars extinction is a myth, and I call it completely irresponsible to compare the small death rate of species now with a meteor or supervolcano, which killed most of the species on the Earth within a couple of days or months. Actually, we haven't killed many species the last 500 years. Only 5% of all birds and animals have been killed. That's not a lot, and most of them died for several hundred years ago when some British ships came to an island and they put out cats and rats, and the indigenous animal population didn't know how to do it. They were killed by the cats and the rats. And actually, one thing which is harming biodiversity is our idea that we should start burning biomass and making bioethanol. That takes space away from nature. I think the global energy policy is completely wrong, doesn't work. Everybody uses more coal, and the costs are very high. And many of you from developing countries are subjected to what I call green colonialism. People are trying to dictate what you should do. The other day I gave this lecture in another university, and an Ethiopian student told me that not only will the World Bank and others, they will not loan any money out to oil, gas, and coal exploration, but they will also try to do bad things if you do anyway. And I think that's bordering to evil. Shouldn't do that. All of you should just cry out loud and say we wouldn't take it. What should we do? Nothing. I know it's not a very nice political statement, but we know that there's a limited amount of fossil fuels, and eventually nuclear fission will be cheaper. So else we should learn to adapt. That's very, very important. That's what Lombard says. He says we should also do research and development. Of course, we should do that. It's not so easy to find new energy sources, but we should try. Real global disasters, you should have a look at those. And there are 4 types. There are human, natural, catastrophic, and existential. Existential, that's we all die. Catastrophic, that's just like, more or less like the COVID, that about 10 million die. It's a catastrophe. I give you 4 examples here. Supervolcanoes could really make a big impact. And actually, human beings were nearly extinct for 75,000 years ago when the Toba volcano exploded. And regional nuclear war is now an option. And even I have to say, when I was a kid, the global nuclear war was an option. And we were afraid all the time. And we were reasonably so afraid because it was a real threat. But now the regional nuclear war is absolutely a risk, and it would be terrible for the world in many respects. And pandemics, of course, we all know COVID, but that's a very, very mild pandemic. Think about it in this way. If we had a microorganism which was like HIV with a long incubation period of months, you had a high mortality like smallpox, you had an airborne infection like COVID, then we could all be infected and we will first know it when we started dying and we could do about nothing. That's the things we need to prepare, because it's just a lottery ticket to draw the long ticket. Also think about the Spanish flu. It killed between 50 and 100 million people at a time where we were only 2 billion people. So it was also a tough one. Totalitarianism is a huge threat. I would warn anyone against thinking about a world government. It could be nice if it's smart people who are controlling, but it wouldn't be nice if it's not. We could end up with a global Amish society where, like Emperor Wu of the Han Dynasty in China for more than 1500 years ago, stopped all technological development. It has probably damaged China since, and that's maybe why it was the English who sailed to Beijing and asked the Chinese to surrender, instead of the Chinese sailing to London and ask the English to surrender. We need to evolve for many good reasons. Network effects. If we have some smart people, we can share them with many other peoples, like Mozart or Chandrasekhar. And we should also do it because it's fun. I just want to mention Julian Simon, who is my inspiration. He is saying that even if things are getting better, people will always say that they're getting worse. And we should also prepare ourselves against human stupidity. The gods contend in vain against human stupidity. But there you should take heart by the fact that perfect is not a prerequisite. You don't have to act perfect. And you all know that we human beings, we don't act perfect. As individuals, as companies, as organizations, as governments, we all do crazy, stupid stuff. But we still seem to do better. That's really something you should note. We should go into space. I don't think there are others out there, but that you can discuss that forever, but we haven't found others. But space is such a huge pioneering area that we should go there. There's also a very interesting future studies guy called Robin Hanson, who says that we have actually had 3 phases of human development which increased our productivity hugely. That was hunting and farming and industry. And he says that the time is ripe for another 200 times increase in productivity. I'm not saying it will go like that, but I just want you to look at ChatGPT, which you have all noted, and think about if we get general intelligence, artificial general intelligence, it could make such a case. And then, of course, now we are on 0.0 on the Kardashev scale. We only use a minute part of the sun hitting the Earth. But we could use all of the sun. We could use all of the sun in our solar system. We could use all our sun in our galaxy, and we could use all our energy in our universe. So that's just scope for improvement, you could say. And you should think of the lives of the unborn. If it doesn't develop quickly, a lot of opportunities are lost. A lot of people are not born. A lot of ideas are not created. A lot of nice things are not being passed. So there's a huge opportunity cost if you keep back development. Thank you. That was it.
Thank you very much, Dr. Carl. Thank you. Indeed, you deserve a big hand. So I think just to follow the procedure, we will first look at our online audience if they have any questions to ask. I have put a message that if you have any question, please let us know. Still, I haven't seen any question, but dear participants who are joining online, if you have any question, maybe you can raise your hands and unmute yourself and ask. No. Okay, so that gives the opportunity for participants here. So maybe the floor is now open and we can, yes, you can raise your hand and ask one by one.
Good afternoon, sir. Sir,
Please introduce yourself a little bit.
Sir, I am Munira. I am from India, and we are here in AIT for 2 months for training. So thank you for this wonderful seminar. So you have just told about all the important questions which we are facing right now in the world, and we are trying to confront it in all the possible ways. So you said that climate change and population are not as much big problems which we are facing. I would like to question you that if we keep climate change, pollution, population aside, as an agriculturist, we also know that soil, if we consider soil, you haven't included it in your, but I want to ask you that if we know that we are facing the deterioration in the soil quality. So do you think that it is an important question in short run as well as long run, and is it going to affect agriculture and human in any way?
Thank you. That's of course a very important question. There's lost a lot of soil over the world, but also the solutions. I mean, there's a lot of good agricultural practice who actually can keep the soil. I mean, in India you see fields on mountains, and they have just developed the technical. So I think it's a technological issue, and it's probably more or less a issue of lack of knowledge and lack of funds and lack of and poverty issue. But of course, it's important to preserve the earth. I have to say though that the very long future for agriculture is probably not on soil. It may be indoor. If you have ample energy in form of fusions, for instance, then you can just grow your plants by lighting on it. So I don't think soil is there. It's actually not necessary. What is really necessary is land, because a plant is a catcher of solar energy. That's why it's so smart. A windmill is a bad one. I can tell you, originally the windmills were made in Persia, and they did a very smart thing. They used them for pumping water into a reservoir so they could use them for watering. And the Dutch and the Danes, they used them for making flour out of grain. So that's also stored, if you can store the energy. And that's why plants are perfect for using solar energy. Windmills are not.
Next question, yes, please.
I'm Dr. Kaushik Khamri. I work as a postdoc at SAD here. So you must have read the book Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari. It's a very famous book. So he writes that once upon a time in Australia, there are very big marsupial animals like marsupial lions, marsupial cats, and then diplodocus, etc. And they used to roam there, but now not even a single of these animals are present there, because once the Homo sapiens has reached the Australian island, they have all killed them. So don't you think that it's an example? It is an example of a mass extinction of the animals from their native places?
Okay, thank you. It's of course a relevant question, but I don't think we have done a massive extinction. We have done, as you rightly say, it's not us. It's not us today, but our forefathers did these kind of things, and they were bad. But still, there are many species left. It's not like a meteor. Then everything dies. But I think we are now changing. We are now changing. In the very rich countries, we are now trying to make more habitats for nature. Also in the marine areas, there are many more marine habitats. We are introducing wild species, like in Denmark. We didn't have any wolves for 20 years ago. Now we have wolves in Denmark. So I think if you get rich enough and care enough about nature, then you gradually produce it. So I look optimistic on that. I'm not saying of course, there's still issues. If you burn your forest down and such things, then it's bad from anything. But I think we can cope with it, and we know how to cope with it, and we are starting caring more.
So I once Indian great leader Mahatma Gandhi wrote that the world has enough to meet everybody's need, but not to meet everybody's greed. So now it is the time to go far away from that to think different than that principle.
Yes, of course, you can say that that's a smart saying, but I also have to say, what is greed? I mean, if you want to do good for yourself and your family, and you want to have a little bit of living standards, I don't think that's greed. I think it's just natural human wanting to have a good time, and we have to say that we are actually very, very smart at increasing the opportunities for having a good material life. And I wouldn't call it greed. There are greedy people out there, but that's true. But there are also very few people who are non-greedy in the way that they don't want any material life betterment. I have been a senior manager for many years in my life, and I never had one of my workers coming to me and ask to be put down in wages. Never. They always want to have more salary. And I think that's human nature.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Kal, for your presentation. My name is Kesav. I am from Nepal. I'm doing MBA in AIT. So my concern is I was shocked how easily you mentioned that the life lost by global warming is not, we should not put so much care about it. Because there are more other issues that should be cared of. I don't think we should quantify the lives, which one cause more death, which one cause less. Even one life lost by global warming has the same importance. So, and for global warming and indoor air, outdoor air pollution, I think most of the pollutants are similar. Those that causes outdoor air pollution are also causing the global warming. So don't you think we should also put global warming as a major concern? Just saying that global warming is causing less death doesn't mean it is not of equal importance, the outdoor air pollution or indoor air pollution.
Thank you, but you raise a very important issue. How do you weigh different issues against each other? And that's, of course, very difficult. But this guy, Lombard, and other economists have done it in the way they say, if you solve this problem, what would it mean for the GNP? And you have to measure. If you don't, you just feel. Feelings is a very bad way of decision making. You have to do some measurements. And I prefer mortality, which is very concrete. Either you are dead or not. That's not something you can. And then money is also very important, because at least if you are poor, money is a survival thing. Anyway, I had some very, very smart Nepalese students when I was at AIT. And we had a lecture where I talked to them about a very interesting country with a lot of mountains and a lot of water and a lot of soldiers. And do you know what that country was? No, it was Switzerland. And Switzerland is one of the richest countries in the world. And you always say in Nepal, we have so many mountains that we can only live by hiring soldiers out. But it's your governance, Swedish governance, smart, yours are not. Yet it will come. But and think about your possibilities for making water energy. You have so much water. You could supply half of the north of India with energy.
Good afternoon, sir. My name is Ravi. I'm from India. My name is Chandra, sir. So you told that the deaths are the mortality is due to the climate change, not because of the climate change, but due to the poverty. So what the world needs leaders need to do in order to mitigate the poverty and also death.
You are asking about that I think that climate change is not an issue for mortality. Not yet, at least. Yeah, but as I said, I think we should prioritize our use of money to get the most bang for the buck. That means we should go directly to the biggest problems. And the biggest of all problems is poverty. It's also number one on the Millennium Goals. And so we can eradicate poverty, then a lot of stuff gets much easier. Also to adapt to climate change. Climate change is something which will always happen, even if we human beings don't try to influence it. It will still happen. Actually, it's very likely we will get into an ice age in 10,000 years. It's a long time, but it's likely, and then all the Danes will move to Thailand. But anyway, so that's why I don't like the idea that making energy very, very expensive for poor countries is a very bad idea, because then they don't get rich in the same rate as we got. So my highest priority is economic growth and getting rid of poverty.
Thank you. Thank you, Oliver. Actually, my name was mentioned 24 years ago. I was also in that seminar. And as you know that I'm very glad to see a lot of young people here, and that you learn from another side, another angle of the concept of climate change, right? And as we all know that the way we handle climate change issue until change will come. About 30 years ago, we mainly focused on mitigation, meaning try to reduce CO2 emission. And then now we are more on adaptation. And 24 years ago, I also called for more research because the science give us better understanding of the climate change issue, because we have natural causes, we have man-made causes, and you learn today that it's controversy and opinion about climate change. It's good that we are all sitting here today, and then you learn about that. I'm very glad. And nowadays that we work more on co-benefit or multiple benefits. When we deal with climate change, adaptation or mitigation, we gain benefit for other things, for the environmental quality. And you are right when you raise question about soil quality, air quality, indoor and outdoor, and then how that all link to the solution that we actually put forward for climate change. And of course, from Kaliber talk, say renewable energy is very expensive, but then it looks like all the countries in Asia moving to that direction, where we have it, like wind or solar energy, and thermal power plant, like coal-fired power plant, is if we still continue using coal. So not talking about CO2, but talking about the air quality, air pollution. That also bad. So that's why nowadays we are more on co-benefit, multiple benefit approach to deal with climate, environment, and then we have circular economy. You know that the one that is very new and very good for all you young people to actually have a sort of at that and think more of that, because I'm a professor at AIT. I'm working with environmental engineering management. They call me Professor Kim. I've been here for a long time, that at my retirement age already. So, but then like living also years through. So I am glad that Kali will give you this talk today and give you curiosity, not kill the death, the cat, but make you smarter. Okay? So think of that and think of all those things, and there's not only one way to be lived. There are a lot of things for young people like you to think about. Thank you. So I don't give definitely this direction or that direction, but good to do more research, like research and development mentioned there, or the science. So we go for science to understand things better. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Kim. I think before I give another chance to our floor here, we have now a couple of questions from the online audiences. So let me just read one by one. The first one is from Gonzalo Jr. I think the question is, what is your opinion why there is slow progress in converting to renewable energy?
It's also a very good question and relevant question, but I have to say it's because the so-called renewables are not renewable in the way that they demand this backup. Even solar, it's much more interesting than wind, because the solar energy is 100 times bigger than the potential for solar energy is 100 times bigger than wind. And it's just a question of storing things over a night. If you have wind, you have to store it up. In Denmark, you can, or Northern Europe, you can have to store it for 3 or 4 weeks, and that makes it very, very, very difficult and very, very expensive. So I think it's to be quite frank, I think it's a fool's game. You can't do it like that. You have to, if you want to change rapidly, you have to go into nuclear, or else you have to keep on burning fossil fuels. The other things will not work. We have seen in all areas of the world where you have a rate of energy more than about 20% of wind, then it gets expensive, very expensive, because you have all these extra costs of backup and transmission and all that kind. And I think that's why. I also have to say that there's a lot of not being frank about the issue. Everybody are talking each other after the other, and I would also have to say that it could be some forces in China and India and other places where they think that it's smart that we let the West shoot themselves in the foot by using renewables, which we are selling to them anyway, while we still make, and they make many more coal plants in India and Indonesia and China, all these places. They make a lot. They don't say so much about it, but they make a lot. So that's why I think it's misguided simply to think that you can do anything useful with wind.
Thank you, Carl. I think that brings to the question number 3, which is quite relevant. I will read the second question later. The third question is from Neil from India. Hi, Carl. I'm Neil from India. Thanks for the great suggestion. I agree to your point that nuclear energy is the future. However, over the years, nuclear power has gained a bad reputation due to accidents in the past. Even countries in Europe like Germany have gone out of their way to reduce reliance on the nuclear power. How do we as humanity course direct?
Please repeat the exact question. I didn't get it.
Well, his concept is nuclear energy has gained some bad reputation.
Yes.
Even the Germany has coming out. Yes. So what do you suggest?
Oh, yeah. I think that all these issues with nuclear is also completely misguided. If you look at the safety record of nuclear power plants, look per kilowatt hour produced, it's absolutely the safest form of energy. And the people died at the Fukushima. They died not from the nuclear accident, they dying from fear because they were panic immigrated. And else there has been very, very few deaths. And the waste issue has been solved many years ago. You can just keep the waste on the it was so little amount of waste, you can keep it on the power plant, and then eventually you can use it with breeders. I think all these things are a psychological issue of trying to combine nuclear power with nuclear war. That's why people are afraid. But if you look at the rational thing, nuclear is, and it is the future, because eventually coal and oil and gas will run out. And if you don't have anything else now, you may be able to get it further on, but you don't have anything now. Actually, in Denmark, we see now a change. In Sweden, it's just recently changed the government attitude. Now they want to build more nuclear plants. And in Denmark, the resistance against nuclear is declining. And the Germans are being a little bit of fools because they are actually burning more coal because they're taking very well functioning nuclear plants out of order, which is not smart. So if I was afraid of climate, I would just say build nuclear from now on. I'm not so afraid, so I think we shouldn't discard the huge amount of value there is in fossil fuels. They represent a fantastic value, several gross national products of the world. So we shouldn't just let it lie. But anyway, I wouldn't be afraid of nuclear, but I understand why people are afraid.
Thank you. So there is the last question. Thanks, Carl, from Neil. Neil has given his thanks. So there is the last question, which is about the plastic waste. And I think this has come from Ian from Vietnam. His question is, the question is, how can we have effectively treatment of plastic bags? In Vietnam, there is a very interesting statistics that the person has given. In Vietnam, each housewife can use an average of 10 plastic bags per day per visit to open market. And about 1/3 of our total population, which is 100 million, is the housewives.
Yeah. First of all, I know plastic is a very interesting issue and it's coming up all the time, but I also have to say it's not in the same league as climate change. It is not. It's a problem. But actually, if you look at the very developed countries, they all have solid waste disposal systems, so it's a small problem. All the plastics from the polluting the world's oceans are coming from a few rivers in Asia. And it's simply because you still haven't developed the waste disposal systems. What I don't like is the idea of prohibiting the use of plastics, because plastics has a use. It keeps things safe from hygienic purposes and many things. So again, you should look at the main effect of using something and not just the side effect. And to prohibit things just means that you have to use something else, and what is about something else is not so good either. So the way to cope with plastics is to have a modern solid waste collection system, and then you can burn it and everybody are happy.
Thank you, Carl. So we are back to the room again. Do we have any other question from audience, from participants? I think I don't see any more questions, so probably I'll just repeat maybe the previous question I think some of our colleagues asked. Because we have learned from this presentation the development model that you are trying to convey to us is like there is an opportunity cost for slow development. If we don't develop fast, and today we will be paying high in the future. But this slow development, this fast development model that has also connection that we have learned with a lot of destruction. Of course, it's pollution, it's eutrophication, it's biodiversity loss, and many other things. So there is a knowledge that has been given to this part of the world that the development has to be either slow down or well development pathway, which should address all these issues. So I'm just trying to reiterate this and trying to get a little more from you, that because we are much more concerned about the old development pathway, which is develop fast, destroy everything if it is required, and then redevelop or reestablish, which could be the nature or the environment or the biodiversity or the other things.
Yeah, it's very relevant. How do you control growth? I don't think this about destroy everything is on the table anymore. I mean, modern agricultural development is about the opposite. That is using less space. The big footprint of agriculture is using too much space. So if you make a good Danish farmer can produce about double as the average global output. So everybody in the world had agriculture like a Danish farmer. We could halve the agricultural area of the world. So I think we should develop fast, because the opportunity cost of not doing it are huge. It's people dying too early. It's people getting too poor. But I also have to admit that, of course, you should think. You should think. There can be issues. I don't like the precautionary principle. I think that's rubbish, because if you don't want to do anything before you're completely sure that you will not make a mistake, you will never make anything. So I don't like that. I like actually the bravery principle, that you should do things to see what happens. But on the other hand, of course, we have to think. What I think is a way to do that is to having free speech and democratic rights. I think that's very important. And then have different types of people. I'm a guy who I'm not so afraid of trying things, but I also like that there's the other guy or lady who say, be a little bit more careful. And then we outweigh each other. But to stop growth is to kill people. I wouldn't like that. The world growth is fairly okay. It's about 3 to 4% per year. But Danish growth is low. We are down to 1.4 per capita per year, and that's too low. We should go for 3 or something like that. We're a very, very developed country. There wouldn't be a lot of bad things about that. But we stop growth not because of these things, but because of equity reasons. Many people are more concerned with distribution of wealth than creating wealth. That's a political issue. I'm the guy who say, let's produce much wealth, and then even the poorest will get much better off. And the other guys say, hey, we should distribute more and grow less. That's political.
Thank you, Carl. You have raised your eyebrows because the thing that I was trying to convey to you, when I was in Denmark, I saw people have been working quite a lot to address the eutrophication issue. And all the lakes in Denmark happen to be polluted, correct? So I'm just saying that there is a cost of actually recovering this ecosystem or environment as well. So that's of course connected with this green revolution and the blue revolution that came one after another. So just little more suggestion if you could actually give to us for the people of this part of the world from the experience that you have.
Yes, eutrophication is an issue in Denmark and in many agricultural countries. You're fully right.
And also the soil fertility.
But when I was teaching at AIT, many of the students looked at me like I was some crazy guy because they used nutrients to put into the ponds so the fish could grow better. And it is a little bit of a luxury problem. Eutrophication. It's not a non-problem, but it's a luxury problem. It's not something that kills people. It just makes the water a little bit more unclear, and you have some oxygen deficient and so on. And we are solving it. For instance, go 25 years back, the Danish agriculture were emitting double as much nitrogen as it does now. So we are solving it by using nitrogen more and more efficiently. And if we look at this curve, we will see that in, say, 50, 100 years, we will have no discharge of nitrogen from agriculture. And it's not necessary to push the matter because it's just too expensive. Every time you try to command, control, enforce something before the technological level is there, it costs too much. And this money you could have used for other better purposes.
Thank you very much. Dear participants, any other questions, queries? Okay, so in that case, let us conclude this session. I would probably just repeat 4 points again that has been actually the key takeaways for me, basically. I think the first one I have already spoken. Development is inevitable. We need development, and we need fast development. We need development for a country like India, having more than 1 billion people, country like China, and then also a country like Indonesia, or the country where I come from, Bangladesh, with 200 million people. So definitely that is required. But of course, we are concerned And for that, probably we need to look at the technology and innovation and the science. And Professor Kim also has mentioned that there is a lot to do in the field of science. There is a lot to learn and bring those technology, innovation, and the science in our development. The third one is, yes, we need good governance. And that actually probably is missing in many parts of the world. Like you have heard, there is a huge production, but there are still malnourished people are around. There are, people who are not getting any food. But the production-wise, we are not failed. We have enough production probably in somewhere in one part of India or somewhere in China or other parts of the world. I think the last takeaway for me is the prioritizing the issues. This is a very, very important thing. We were all talking about climate change over the last 5-10 years, but it is the pandemic that killed most of the people recently, correct? It is actually the air pollution. Recently, I don't know if you have noticed in last 2-3 weeks, Thailand is very much concerned about PM 2.5, which is basically the air pollution issue. It's a burning of many things, including the agricultural waste. And that actually giving us lots of issues. And I see many AIT people even got sick of that. So yes, the last point is the prioritizing the issues, which are the issues that we need to prioritize in our development. So with that, I think we can conclude this session, giving a big thanks again to our speaker, Professor Carl Ivar Dahl Martsen from Denmark. So thank you very much, Dr. Carl. We have a little souvenir for you, and on behalf of AIT, I think I will request Professor Kim to hand over as your colleague and also as one of our AIT professor. Yeah, no problem. Can we have, yeah. Okay, so yeah, just a little more announcement. Have a seat, please. So, of course, thank you to all of our online participants and all of our participants, students, faculty members, staffs, and my colleagues here. So thank you very, very much for your time and for attending this seminar. As you have heard at the beginning, we will continuously doing this kind of session in the future. So please keep an eye in our website and also in our online medias. As Professor Carl just mentioned, he has his Facebook. You can be connected with him. You can be connected with us, and we will be announcing for the future. Just for your information, the immediate next webinar, which will be completely online, because the next speaker for this webinar will be someone who will deliver his talk from Australia. So we'll have this webinar on project management in a disaster context. So those of you who are managing project, interested about project management, probably it is a very interesting webinar to attend, which will be happening on 23rd of February, 2023. And that will be completely online. You can register and you are all welcome to join that. And then, of course, over the year, we will have this seminars, webinars will continue, and we are calling it as the AIT Extension, experience sharing sessions. So with that, once again, thank you very much. I hope you have had an opportunity to grab the little water and the snacks that we had. If not, please, you can take it when you are going back. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. That's the conclusion of this.